Across windswept hills and rugged coastlines, where mist clings to ancient stone and the modern world feels impossibly distant, there exists a dimension of storytelling unlike anywhere else on Earth. Ireland, Scotland, Wales, these lands didn't just develop folklore casually, the way other cultures did. They developed something far more intricate. A complete taxonomy of the supernatural. Creatures so specific, so detailed, so embedded into the fabric of daily survival, that they shaped how entire civilizations understood danger, loss, death itself. These aren't fairy tales for children or quaint stories told around a fire to pass the time. These are cautionary tales. Survival guides encoded in narrative form. Every creature in Celtic mythology served a purpose. Every legend encoded a lesson. And that lesson was often, the world is far stranger and far more dangerous than you assume. Stay vigilant. Follow the rules. Respect the boundaries. Tonight, we're journeying into that twilight realm. We're meeting the beings that haunt Celtic folklore, not as entertainment, but as a window into how ancient peoples understood the universe. And what we'll discover is that these creatures weren't invented from nothing. They emerged from real observations, real fears, real moments of confrontation between human beings and the unknown. The veil between worlds, according to Celtic belief, was thin in certain places and at certain times. But it wasn't impenetrable. And the beings that dwelt on the other side weren't abstractions or pure symbolism. They were as real to the Celtic people as the forests they lived in. And their presence shaped everything, from the routes people took when traveling, to the rituals they performed to protect their homes, to the very structure of their moral codes. This is the story of those creatures. And it begins with a sound that still chills the spine of anyone who hears it described. Imagine a quiet Irish night. The world asleep under stars. And then, a sound cuts through the darkness. Not the sound of wind, not an animal, but something unmistakably human and unmistakably otherworldly. A cry of such profound sorrow that it seems to carry the weight of every grief the world has ever known. High and sharp one moment, then low and mournful the next. A wail that pierces bone and freezes blood. This is the Banshee. In Irish, her name translates to woman of the city, but not a city of mortal construction. The ancient side, the fairy mounds that dot the Irish landscape, were believed to be cities of the other world. And the Banshee was a permanent resident of these places. A keeper of death. A herald of approaching endings. Here's what's crucial about the Banshee that most modern retellings get wrong. She wasn't evil. She wasn't trying to harm anyone. She was fulfilling a cosmic function. According to the belief system, certain families, ancient families, families of pure Irish blood with names like a Neil, a Brian, a Connor, these families had banshees attached to them. It was like having a spiritual guardian whose sole responsibility was to announce death before it arrived. When someone from one of these families was about to die, the banshee would appear and begin her lament. And this was understood not as a curse but as a strange honor. Your family was old enough, significant enough, that the other world took notice. That death would announce itself formally before claiming you. Not everyone received this courtesy. Only the families important enough to warrant a supernatural witness. The banshee's appearance varied depending on the account. Sometimes she was described as beautiful, a pale woman with long silver hair, dressed in grey, her eyes red from centuries of weeping. Other times she was reported as a terrifying old hag, withered and bent, her face a mask of ancient sorrow. The inconsistency wasn't a flaw in the folklore. It was a feature. It suggested that the banshee transcended the normal categories of age and appearance. She existed outside the normal rules that governed physical reality. The Irish Folklore Commission archives contain hundreds of sworn testimonies from people who claim to have heard the banshee. And the testimonies are remarkably consistent. The sound was unmistakable. Once heard, never forgotten. And invariably, within days or weeks, someone in the family died. In some cases, the person who heard the cry was on the other side of the world at the time. But the banshee's cry still reached them. Time and distance were irrelevant to her. She was announcing something from outside the normal flow of time. Most people think they know what a leprechaun is. A tiny man in a green suit with buckled shoes, a cheerful trickster protecting a pot of gold. This image is so embedded in popular culture that the original leprechaun, the being that inspired the myth, has become almost unrecognizable. The first clear literary reference to a leprechaun appears in a medieval Irish saga called the Eachtra Fergus Mac Letty. In this story, a king named Fergus falls asleep on a beach and awakens to find himself being dragged toward the sea by 3 tiny water spirits. The text calls them Lucorpan, small-bodied water beings. They're not cute. They're not whimsical. They're dangerous enough to threaten a king. Fergus manages to capture them, and they negotiate their freedom by granting him 3 wishes, including the power to breathe underwater. This is the original interaction, not a human outsmarting a mischievous creature for his gold, but a near-death experience with beings that operate by completely different rules than humans do. Over centuries, the legend transformed. The water spirit gradually moved inland. By the medieval period, the leprechaun had settled into a very different profession, shoemaking. This wasn't random. According to the folklore, the other fairies, the Ishi, were obsessed with dancing. And dancing wore out their shoes. So they needed a cobbler. A tireless craftsman who would work in solitude, creating footwear for a being whose dance never ended. The constant tap-tap-tapping of the leprechaun's hammer became the auditory signature that would lead you to him. If you heard that sound, you'd found a leprechaun. And if you found a leprechaun, you might be able to capture him. And if you captured him, he'd negotiate his freedom by revealing his treasure. This treasure aspect is what creates the trap in the leprechaun mythology. Yes, he had gold. Vast amounts of it. Or a magical purse that always contained a silver shilling. Endless wealth. But getting the leprechaun to actually surrender the treasure required holding his complete attention. The moment you looked away, even for an instant, he'd vanish. His escape was assisted by trickery, a sudden swarm of bees, a shout about a prized bull breaking a fence, any distraction at all. The lesson encoded in the leprechaun myth is sharp and clear: wealth can be lost through carelessness. Fortune, if not held with constant, unwavering attention, will slip away. The leprechaun wasn't inherently evil. He was just playing by the rules of his nature. And if you couldn't maintain focus, that was your problem, not his. But the leprechaun had a darker twin. A nocturnal counterpart known as the Leprechaun. While the leprechaun worked, the Leprechaun drank. He was a cellar-dwelling spirit with an insatiable love for alcohol and a vicious streak of mischief. If treated well, he'd protect a household's wine from spoiling. If offended, he'd sour entire stocks and torment the household servants, riding them through the night like horses. In the Scottish lowlands and rural farmsteads, there existed a different kind of supernatural being. Not as overtly dangerous as the leprechaun or the Banshee, but just as bound by intricate rules. The brownie was a small, stout, heavily shaggy creature covered in matted hair, usually described as either naked or dressed in the most tattered brown rags imaginable. These creatures, and this is important, were intensely shy. The brownie's entire existence revolved around a single purpose: invisible labor. Every night, while a household slept, the brownie would work. The hearth would be swept immaculately. Butter would be churned. Entire fields would be threshed. In the morning, the family would wake to find their work mysteriously completed. This sounds like a blessing. Literally free labor. But the brownie operated within an exquisitely precise moral framework. The work had to be given freely. And the compensation had to be offered freely as well. A bowl of fresh cream left by the hearth. Good porridge. Maybe a crust of bread. These small offerings weren't payment. The brownie would have been insulted by the suggestion that he was working for food. They were acknowledgement. Respect. A nonverbal agreement that his labor was valued and appreciated. The moment you violated this compact, everything changed. If you failed to leave an offering, the brownie would stop his work. But worse than that, he would begin to cause mischief. He'd tangle yarn, hide tools, sour milk. He'd make life actively difficult for the family that had neglected him. But there was one absolute taboo. One act that was guaranteed to drive the brownie away permanently. If you offered him new clothes. If you left a jacket or trousers by the fire, attempting to gift him with proper garments out of pity, the brownie would interpret this as a profound insult. He would cry out something like, "A new coat, a new hood." The brownie will do no more good. And then he'd vanish forever. This seems counterintuitive at first. Why would offering clothes drive him away? But the logic of the mythology is precise. By offering clothes, you were suggesting that the brownie was a hired hand. A servant. Someone who needed to be properly outfitted to do his job. You were converting a relationship based on mutual respect and free offering into one based on economic transaction. And the brownie couldn't tolerate that transformation. The brownie mythology encodes an important lesson about the nature of reciprocal relationships. Some bonds can't survive the introduction of explicit economic structures. Some relationships require a kind of mutual respect that exists outside the formal exchange of goods for services. We now enter the territory of creatures that aren't ambiguous about their nature. Creatures that don't offer blessings or labor or even the possibility of negotiation. The Dullahan is pure, concentrated death. A being whose only function is to arrive when it's time for someone to leave the world. The Dullahan, the name means without a head, appears as a horseman on a powerful black steed with eyes that glow like embers. But where the rider's head should be, there's only a stump of neck. The Dullahan doesn't travel without his head, though. He carries it tucked under one arm. And the head itself is a nightmare rendered in flesh. Skin the color and texture of moldy cheese. Small black eyes that dart constantly, scanning the darkness. An ear-to-ear grin frozen in place. And most disturbingly, the entire head glows with a sickly phosphorescent light, which the Dullahan uses as a lantern to light his path through the night. When the Dullahan stops his ride and speaks a mortal's name, that person's soul is immediately pulled from their body. Death is instantaneous. Unavoidable. In some traditions, the Dullahan is described as the driver of a death coach called the Coach Bodha, a ghastly construction with wheels made from human thigh bones, covering woven from human skin, and lanterns that are human skulls with candles flickering in the eye sockets. This coach moves without sound. A phantom vehicle on a final, grim journey. The Dullahan is sometimes depicted driving this coach, collecting souls with mechanical efficiency. The Dullahan has one crucial weakness, though. He despises iron. A single iron pin, a horseshoe, any piece of cold iron is enough to make him rear back in fear and vanish into the night. This is one of the few rules that applied universally across Celtic mythology. Iron was protective. Iron was safe. Iron was the one substance that the beings of the other world couldn't abide. The Dullahan also hates being watched. If you observe him from a window or over a hedge, there's a significant risk he'll notice your observation and exact a price. He might flick out a whip made from a human spine and lash out an eye. Or he might douse you with a basin of blood, a mark that singles you out for death at some future point. What makes the Dullahan so terrifying in Celtic mythology is that there's no negotiation. No blessings to be earned. No objects to trade. No rules that favor the clever or the virtuous. The Dullahan simply comes. And when he does, your time has ended. We shift now from creatures of pure danger to beings that embody a different kind of tragedy. In the wild, windswept coasts of Scotland, particularly in the Orkneys and the Shetland Islands, there exists a legend that speaks to something more psychologically complex than death or mischief. The Selkies, the core belief is elegant and heartbreaking. Seals, according to this mythology, possess the ability to shed their skins and walk on land in the form of breathtakingly beautiful humans. But there's a catch. They must keep their seal skins hidden in a safe place. Without the skin, they're trapped. Unable to ever return to their true home beneath the waves. A famous Orkney tale captures this perfectly. A lonely farmer walking the shore at midsummer comes across a group of Selkie women dancing on a secluded beach. Their shimmering seal skins lie nearby on the rocks. Enchanted by their beauty, the farmer makes a fateful decision. He steals one of the skins and hides it. When the Selkies are ready to leave, they retrieve their skins and dive back into the sea. All except one. The woman whose skin the farmer stole searches desperately for her missing property. She's trapped. Stuck on land. And because the farmer holds her skin, she's bound to him. He takes her as his wife. The texts are careful to describe what follows. The woman is a good wife. A loving mother to their children. But there's something profoundly sad about her. Her eyes always gaze toward the endless expanse of the sea. She belongs to the land now, but her soul belongs to the water. She's caught between two worlds, fully at home in neither. Years pass. Then one day, one of the couple's children discovers an old sea-worn skin hidden in the rafters of the barn. The child, recognizing it from their mother's sad stories, brings it to her. The moment she touches it, something ruptures. Her wild true nature floods back into her. With a tearful, loving farewell to her children, and the text suggests this is genuine, that she doesn't stop loving them, she runs to the shore, dons her skin, and plunges into the waves. These tales are infused with a profound melancholy that reveals something important about the cultures that told them. They're stories about profound loss, about consent and captivity, about the deep instinctual pull of one's true home and true nature. The children born of the union are said to have physical markers of their dual heritage, webbed fingers and toes, visible symbols of belonging to two worlds but being fully at home in neither. The Selkie legend isn't about danger or punishment. It's about longing. About the impossibility of truly forcing another being to deny their fundamental nature. No matter how much love exists in a relationship, some things can't be compromised. Some creatures will always hear the call of the sea. While Selkies represent a kind of tragic ambiguity, other water creatures in Celtic mythology embody pure predatory danger. The Kelpie is one such being, a water horse that dwells in deep lochs and rivers, waiting for victims. The Kelpie can appear in multiple forms. Sometimes as a beautiful horse by the water's edge, untethered and seemingly docile. Sometimes as a handsome young man. Sometimes as a floating log. But the core nature of the Kelpie is hunger. It's a creature designed by nature, or by the other world, to lure unsuspecting humans to water and drown them. The most common manifestation is the horse. A beautiful, well-groomed horse standing alone by a loch. A child might approach, drawn by the animal's beauty. They might reach out to touch it, to mount it. And in that moment, the Kelpie's skin becomes sticky and adhesive. The person can't let go. The Kelpie plunges into the water with its victim held fast, dragging them down into depths from which they never emerge. There are ways to protect yourself from a Kelpie. Iron, again, is effective. And there are specific rituals and words of power that can compel the creature. But the core message is clear: water that seems safe can conceal danger. Beauty can be a trap. And you're never entirely certain what lurks beneath the surface of even a familiar loch. The Kelpie mythology likely encoded real dangers. Drownings happen. Swift currents exist. Lochs are genuinely treacherous. But the Kelpie took these real dangers and gave them a face. Transformed them from accident or negligence into deliberate predation by an intelligent agent. And in doing so, the mythology made the dangers more memorable, more instructive. From the depths of the chilling waters around the Orkney Islands emerges a creature so horrifying, so viscerally disturbing, that its name was spoken only in whispered tones. The Knucklevie. A being so foul and malevolent that even other creatures of folklore seem to recoil from it. The Knucklevie is a fusion of horse and rider melted into a single monstrous entity. The rider's torso grows directly from the horse's back, as if they were conjoined from birth. This rider has no legs, but possesses arms so unnaturally long that its knuckles can drag along the ground as it moves, ending in vicious claws. The horse's head is enormous and gaping, with a single massive eye that burns with malevolent red flame. But the detail that sets the Knucklevie apart, the feature that makes it genuinely nightmarish, is that the creature has no skin. The entire being is raw, exposed anatomy. Powerful red muscles and thick yellow veins visible, twitching and pulsing with unnatural vitality. It's a creature turned inside out. A walking, breathing monument to pain and malice. To see the Knucklevie was to risk losing your mind. The psychological impact of encountering such a being was understood to be devastating. But the Knucklevie wasn't just psychologically dangerous. It was a vector for actual physical harm. Its breath, called the mortarine, was a lethal plague. Entire crops could wilt in the field after the creature's passing. Livestock would sicken and die. Epidemics would sweep through communities. The islanders believed the Knucklevie's rage was particularly stirred by the burning of seaweed to create kelp, a common island industry. This has led scholars to propose an interesting ecological interpretation. Perhaps the Knucklevie represented a violent reaction of the sea itself to being exploited. A supernatural embodiment of environmental consequence. According to the lore, there was a single force that could hold the Knucklevie at bay, the mother of the sea, a powerful and ancient sea spirit who acted as a kind of warden, keeping the Knucklevie confined to the ocean depths during the gentle summer months. But as autumn turned to winter and the storms began to rage, her power would wane. And the Knucklevie would be unleashed to stalk the land. For any mortal unlucky enough to cross the creature's path, there was only one sanctuary. One element the skinless demon couldn't tolerate: fresh running water. To cross a stream or the outflow of a loch was to find immediate safety. The creature would halt at the bank, shrieking in impotent fury. This single weakness offered a glimmer of hope in the otherwise pitch-black terror of the Knucklevie, a being that otherwise seemed unstoppable. In the damp, treacherous landscapes of bogs, fens, and marshes, where the ground is unstable and visibility is limited, a phenomenon has been reported for centuries. A small ethereal light. Flickering. Bobbing. Seeming to dance with deliberate purpose. In different regions, this phenomenon was called jack-o'-lantern, the hinky-punk, or the will-o'-the-wisp. Folklore provided a chilling explanation. These lights were either mischievous fairies carrying lanterns or the tormented souls of the dead. And their intent was almost universally malevolent. The lights were understood as deliberate trickery, spirits trying to lure weary travelers off the known safe paths. The phenomenon would begin with a light appearing in the distance. It would seem inviting, welcoming, as if marking the location of a distant cottage or an inn where warmth and safety awaited. A traveler, exhausted and desperate, would chase the light. But as they pursued it, the light would recede, continuously drawing them deeper into the waterlogged terrain of the bog. Farther from safety. Closer to danger, the journey would inevitably end in disaster. The traveler would become lost in the bog, exhausted, sinking into cold, dark water. And the phantom light would dance mockingly over their final resting place. In some traditions, the lights had a slightly different purpose. They were said to hover over the location of buried treasure. And anyone foolish enough to try digging for the treasure under the flickering light would find themselves trapped by the treacherous ground. Another victim of the bog. Here's the fascinating thing about will-o'-the-wisp folklore. It served a genuinely practical purpose. Bogs are legitimately dangerous landscapes, especially after dark. The ground is unstable, with deep hidden pools of water concealed beneath a thin crust of vegetation. A mysterious moving light, something that would distract attention from the immediate terrain, would have been a deadly hazard. The will-o'-the-wisp stories encoded a vital piece of survival knowledge: never trust a strange light in the marsh. Never stray from the known path. The supernatural explanation made the warning more memorable, more emotionally resonant, more likely to be passed down to children and actually followed. The science underlying the phenomenon has become clear. The lights are likely caused by the spontaneous ignition of marsh gases, primarily methane and phosphine released by decaying organic matter. A process called chemoluminescence creates brief, ghostly flickers of cold fire. But here's what's beautiful about this convergence of scientific and folkloric explanation: they don't cancel each other out. They coexist. The scientific framework and the folk belief are representing two different ways of making sense of the same mysterious event. The will-o'-the-wisp is a perfect intersection of the natural and the supernatural. A place where a scientific process and a folk belief meet in a single flickering light. In the misty highlands of Scotland lies the hunting ground of a truly formidable otherworldly creature: the Cù-Sìth, the great fairy hound. This is no mortal dog. It's a being of the other world, a harbinger of death, as large as a young bull, with a shaggy coat of dark, otherworldly green fur. Its paws are the size of a man's hand. Its long tail is often described as coiled or braided, giving it an almost unnatural appearance. The Cù-Sìth moves with ghostly silence, a spectral presence stalking the wild, lonely places of the Scottish landscape. It serves the fairy folk as a guardian, a hunter, and a messenger of death. Its appearance was deeply feared, not just because of its physical form but because of what its presence meant. The Cù-Sìth was a psychopomp, a spirit guide for the dead. When death was approaching, the great hound would appear. But it didn't take life immediately. Instead, it announced death through a ritualistic countdown that was almost theatrical in its precision. For most of the time, the Cù-Sìth moved in complete silence. Utterly soundless. But on occasion, it would stop, raise its massive head, and let out a series of barks. Not just any barks. Specifically 3 barks, and only 3 barks. These weren't the sounds of a normal animal. The barks were described as so loud and so carrying that they could be heard for miles across the land. Some accounts claim that sailors on ships far out at sea could hear them. For any person unfortunate enough to be out in the wilds and hear that first bark, it set off a desperate race against time. The folklore was terrifyingly specific about the rules. You had to reach a place of safety, a home, a settlement, a place of human community, before the third and final bark faded. If you were caught out in the open after the third bark had finished echoing, death would strike you down with what the texts describe as pure unadulterated terror. Your soul would be forfeit to the fairy host. You'd be struck dead by fear itself, before any physical harm could even touch you. This ritual countdown created intense dramatic tension. Life or death based on a race against time. And the mechanism was simple but effective. It reinforced the boundary between the wild supernatural world of the Moors and the safe, protected world of human community. The Cù-Sìth's green pelt marked it as a creature of the otherworld, not of the mortal world. Its grim task tied it to a wider Gaelic anxiety about being caught alone and unprotected, far from the safety of kin and hearth. The Cù-Sìth is a distinct figure within a broader tradition of spectral hounds found throughout the British Isles, creatures like the black dogs of English folklore or the Welsh Cwn Andun, the hounds of the otherworld. But the Scottish fairy hound stands apart with its specific green colouring and its ritualised, deadly barks. It's not a mindless monster but a being with a solemn and terrible function, a servant of the otherworld and a hunter of souls. To truly understand Celtic mythology, you have to understand that these weren't just random creatures haunting the landscape. They were part of a larger cosmic drama. A conflict between 2 fundamental forces. Order and chaos. Civilization and the Primeval. The divine and the chaotic. According to the ancient Irish texts, Ireland was fought over by 2 great races. The Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Thanu, were a divine and luminous people. They weren't creators of the world, but masters of its highest arts. Beings of immense knowledge, skill, and magic. They had arrived in Ireland from mythical northern cities, bringing with them for great treasures, a stone that would cry out when a true king stood upon it, a spear that could never miss its target, a sword from which no one could escape, and a cauldron that could feed any army and never run empty. The Tuatha De Danann represented order. Civilization. Light. They were a people of law and structure, but Ireland wasn't empty when they arrived. It was already contested by the Fomorians, a race of hostile and primeval beings. Their origins are mysterious, often linked to the wild, untamed forces of nature. The raging sea. The blighted earth. The darkness of the underworld. The Fomorians were often described as monstrous. Gigantic. Deformed. Embodying chaos, blight, and tyranny. The conflict between these 2 races played out across mythology in a series of battles. And the central figure of this drama was a character who was crucially positioned between both worlds. A man named Lugh. Lugh was described as a master of every art and every craft imaginable. From smithing and poetry to warfare and sorcery, earning him the title Samhildanac, the equally skilled in all arts. But here's the crucial detail: Lugh was half Fomorian himself. His mother was the daughter of a Fomorian champion. This mixed heritage made him the perfect figure to lead the Tuatha De Danann in their final conflict against Fomorian rule. He represented the possibility of bridging the gap between order and chaos. Of using the strength of chaos in service of order. The conflict culminated in a cataclysmic battle on the plain of Magchad. It was here that Lugh confronted his own grandfather, the most fearsome of all the Fomorians. A being named Bela. Bela possessed a single enormous poisonous eye. This wasn't just any eye. It was so deadly that it had to be kept closed at all times. On the battlefield, it took 4 of his attendants to lever open his eyelid. And when it opened, the effect was pure destruction. The gaze could wither entire armies. In the heat of battle, as Bela's attendants began to lift his eyelid, Luff acted with decisive precision. He took out his sling and launched a stone with such incredible force and perfect aim that it struck directly into Bela's eye and drove it out the back of his head. The eye's devastating toxic power was then turned upon the Fomorian ranks behind him, shattering their army and securing a decisive victory for the Tuatha De Danann. After this victory, the reign of the Tuatha De Danann was secure. But not for long. The coming of mortals, the Milesians, represented another shift. Rather than face another war, the Tuatha De Danann used their remaining power to retreat from the physical world. They withdrew into the hollow hills and the secret places of the land, becoming the Ishi, the powerful and often dangerous fairy folk of later tradition. This transformation is the key to understanding so much of Celtic folklore. The gods didn't disappear. They were diminished. Forced into hiding. And in hiding, they became the creatures of legend. After the great gods withdrew from the world of mortals, the skies of the Celtic lands were said to be traveled by other, more terrifying hosts. Particularly across the Highlands and Islands of Scotland and into Ireland, a phenomenon known as the Slua. The host of the dead. This wasn't an army of ghosts in the traditional sense. It was something far more complex. A terrifying airborne procession. A flock of the most sinful and restless souls of the unforgiven dead. Souls so wicked they were rejected by both heaven and hell. Even the earth itself would not grant them rest. Condemned to wander the skies for eternity, they became a force of pure malice. The Slua were often glimpsed as a dark cloud. A flock of birds. A shadowy, drifting company against the twilight sky. Their passing was accompanied by a rushing wind and strange mournful cries. And their presence was deeply connected to the Highland tradition of second sight, the supposed ability of certain individuals to see visions of the spiritual world. Gifted seers would describe seeing ghostly funeral processions or phantom battles replaying themselves, especially over historic battlefields like Culloden. They claimed these were manifestations of the Slua, souls trapped in an endless cycle, unable to move forward, forced to witness and relive moments of profound violence. The Slua was considered a fearsome part of the Unseelie court, the darker and more malevolent faction of the fairy world. They were said to be most active during the liminal times of the year, especially Samhain, when the veil between worlds was at its thinnest. An encounter with the Slua was a terrifying and dangerous ordeal. They were known to snatch unwary mortals who were out alone at night, carrying them high into the air, sometimes for miles, subjecting them to a terrifying aerial journey before dropping them, battered and traumatized, in a place far from home. Some accounts claim they would try to shoot mortals with elf arrows, invisible projectiles that caused a wasting illness. And they had a particular hunger for the souls of the dying. In many parts of the Highlands, a deeply ingrained custom developed to protect against the Slua. When a person was on their deathbed, all west-facing windows and doors were kept shut. This wasn't random precaution. It was believed that the Slua always traveled from the west and would attempt to enter the house to steal the soul before it could pass on peacefully. The Slua served as a powerful folkloric explanation for a range of phenomena. A sudden violent gust of wind on a calm night. The panicked murmurations of a flock of starlings. An eerie, unidentifiable sound carried on the breeze. All could be interpreted as the passing of the host. Their legend served as a stark warning against venturing out alone at night. But more deeply, it mapped a geography of communal sorrow and sin onto the sky itself. The Slua were a constant moving reminder of the unquiet dead. A celestial army of the damned whose presence was a terrifying omen and a threat to the living. Beyond the major players in Celtic mythology, there exists a vast array of lesser-known creatures, each with their own specific nature and purpose. These beings often embody more localized or specific dangers and lessons. The Avanc was a creature said to dwell in the cold, dark lakes of Wales. Its appearance varied depending on the region, sometimes a monstrous beaver, sometimes a crocodilian form, sometimes a dark, demonic entity with no clear shape. But regardless of form, it was devastatingly powerful. Blamed for breaking fishing nets, overturning boats, and dragging livestock and humans to watery graves. Its rage was said to cause massive destructive floods that could drown entire valleys. The Bean Nye, the woman washer, was a banshee-like figure found in Scottish folklore. She appeared by lonely streams and river fords, always alone, always hard at work washing the blood-stained grave shrouds of those about to die. To encounter her was to know with absolute certainty that a death in the community was imminent. If the shroud she was washing was small, it foretold the death of a child. Her appearance was often grotesque, a single wide nostril, one large protruding tooth, webbed feet, and unnaturally long breasts that hung so low she had to throw them over her shoulders to keep them out of the water. The Modadu was a spectral guardian of Peel Castle on the Isle of Man, a large shaggy coal-black hound that haunted the castle corridors with a silent and intimidating presence. Unlike the terrifying Cù-Sìth, the Modadu seemed almost protective in its own disturbing way. Though its mere presence inspired deep terror, the Gancanar was a male fairy figure, often beautiful and seductive, known for causing emotional distress and unrequited love. Gancanars would seduce young women and then abandon them, leaving them to waste away with longing. The water leaper was an amphibious creature from Irish folklore, a predatory being that would leap from water onto the land to attack humans and livestock. It was smaller than a Kelpie but no less dangerous. The Ellentrekand was a three-headed creature, often depicted as chaotic and monstrous, embodying primal chaos in a very literal form. Each of these creatures, however obscure, served a purpose in the Celtic understanding of the world. They filled specific niches in the taxonomy of danger. And they all operated under the same basic rules. They respected Iron, they followed mysterious internal logic, and they embodied specific fears or lessons. Why do these creatures persist? Why, in a modern world of rationality and science, do people still feel compelled to tell these stories? Why do they still grip the imagination? The answer is that Celtic mythology wasn't created to entertain. It was created to transmit survival knowledge, to warn against real dangers, to create shared stories that bound communities together, and to articulate a worldview where the universe was fundamentally mysterious and potentially hostile. In ancient Celtic societies, the creatures of mythology weren't metaphors. They were understood as real. And that understanding shaped how people moved through the world. It made them attentive, cautious, respectful of boundaries, understanding that there were things beyond human comprehension, but there's something deeper here too. These creatures embody archetypes that appear across human mythology. The harbinger of death, the trickster, the creature that represents the boundary between human civilization and wild nature, the being that embodies chaos itself. These aren't unique to Celtic culture. They appear in every human mythology because they speak to something fundamental about the human condition. We live in a world we don't fully understand. We're surrounded by forces that are beyond our control. We're subject to death. We're capable of both great love and profound loss. These creatures of Celtic mythology give form to these universal human anxieties. And in giving them form, they make them bearable. The Banshee isn't just a supernatural phenomenon. She's a personification of the inevitability of death and the human need to mourn. The Leprechaun isn't just a fairy trickster. He's an embodiment of how easily we can be tricked by desire for wealth. The Brownie isn't just a household spirit. He's a reminder that some relationships exist outside economic transaction. What's remarkable about Celtic mythology is how precise and specific these lessons are. These aren't vague moral tales. They're finely calibrated narratives designed to transmit very particular pieces of knowledge about how to live in a particular kind of world, and that's what makes them still relevant. Because while the specific dangers have changed, the fundamental uncertainty hasn't. We still live in a world we don't fully understand. We're still subject to forces beyond our control. And we still need stories that help us make sense of the dark places. That remind us to be attentive. That teach us that the world is stranger and deeper than we assume. The Celtic creatures of mythology are still out there, not in the hills and bogs of ancient Ireland necessarily, but in our collective imagination. And as long as humans wonder about what lurks just beyond the edge of our understanding, these beings will continue to haunt us. To teach us. To remind us of the limits of rational knowledge and the enduring power of mystery. The veil between worlds may not be as thin as the ancient Celts believed. But something in us, something deep and primitive and ineradicable, still feels the possibility that it might be. And that feeling is perhaps the most important legacy of Celtic mythology. The reminder that there is always more to the world than what we can measure and quantify. That there are always mysteries. And that's not a weakness of human knowledge. It's a feature. It's what keeps us humble, attentive, alive to the strangeness and wonder of existence.